I had reached this, apex of what it means to be a man. I should have been thrilled, like absolutely over the moon. And the reality was, like, I felt lonely. I felt disconnected from myself, and other people, and like deep relationships. And I felt like in many ways I was falling behind in who I wanted to be as a person.
Yeah. So what do you think it means to be a good man? What?
So I'm Patch. I'm a therapist for men and couples, so psychotherapist. And how it relates to Under the Hood talk, I mean, from what I gather from following the platform, it's kind of creating a dialogue around men and masculinity and helping boys and men. And that's basically what I do every day. I actually wanted to be a therapist as a high schooler. I took a high school psychology class, kind of random that you would have that in high school, but it was on Freud. And at the same time, I think I got a ticket. Me and my friends got a ticket for trying to buy alcohol underage, and and I got assigned, it was either 30 hours of community service or 8 hours of group therapy. And so I chose the 8 hours of group therapy, and I just loved it. Like, it was really cool. So yeah, my interest started around sophomore year of high school. And when I expressed that to friends and family, it was kind of like people were convincing me not to do it. So I kind of followed everyone's advice and took a more like traditionally masculine path, and ended up working in advertising for about 8 years in New York City. And was managing director, ran a few boutique ad agencies. I was good at it, and at the same time it was, for me, not fulfilling, and I felt like I was lacking purpose. And also to perform at the kind of like peak level in that business, in that industry, you kind of have to engage a lot of what I'll call like hyper-masculine traits, with a lot of workaholism, a lot of substance use, kind of, aggressive, a lot of dominance, and really competitive, right? And I was prioritizing that over friends and relationships. So I basically started going to therapy myself again after a big breakup, and I found that I was just like so wrapped, like really engaged in group therapy, which is what I was doing. I was in a men's group led by a licensed clinical social worker, and I was like, man, this is real life. This is people talking about real stuff that I care about. We're like really tapping into our emotions. I am, I've been an existentialist my whole life, so I was always questioning like the meaning behind things. And I also started going to Al-Anon as well. And, I just like found myself so engaged there. And then I would go to advertising and find myself like, what am I learning about all this stuff? How's this helping me in real life? And I wanted a more integrated, purpose-driven life. So took me about 5 years to finally make the plunge. But I applied to grad school, and I got into UCLA, and my pitch, what I wanted to go to school for was to normalize male emotionality, which is something that I had kind of struggled with my whole life, in the sense that I was a really sensitive kid, and I grew up in pretty hyper masculine environments, and then I learned how to just basically numb that and kind of exile or banish that part of me, and I think it honestly led to a lot of misery, frankly. So I was like, okay, what's unique to my experience? Meaning, what do I have lived experience with? What do I have intergenerational experience with? What does society really need right now? And that kind of confluence of things was like, oh, well, I want to help men. First, just some like background context, like intergenerational stuff. I come from a long line of Navy veterans, so like admirals in the Navy going back generations, actually on both sides. When you imagine like what hypermasculinity and that culture was built for, it was built for sending men to war and also sending men to business. And so it really was an amazingly strong and effective package to create soldiers and killer business people. In my home, performance was everything. Emotions were kind of feminized and minimized, and very competitive. A lot of domination, a lot of aggression, and any form of weakness was kind of snuffed out. It wasn't acceptable, it wasn't allowed. So I kind of learned like, oh, this like sensitivity, the fact that I have emotions as a man, the fact that my sister is actually like much more almost like alpha and like strong and competitive than I am, was like, oh, I'm not a man. I'm like a broken, man. And so that kind of was repeated in the playground, where I had like really, really tough friends, in the sense that like, we were skaters and we grew up in like the 90s LA and like hip hop culture, and it was all about being hard, and my friends were hard. They fought all the time. We didn't smile in any photos. Like you look at photos of me from that era and I look fucking pissed. And the reality was that I was more scared than anything. Like my friends, like, it was a fight every weekend. I was not a huge fighter. And so that was this other place where like I learned it's not okay to smile. Any feminine qualities are weak, or some homophobic slur. Like I could only socialize with other guys. Play, dancing, anything that was like fun or joyful was not okay. And so when I got to college, I recognized like, okay, that's kind of bogus, and wow, finally I get some freedom. But, I carried through that kind of, some of the, like still super competitive, still, like snuff my emotions. Still very oriented towards performance. And one of the performance elements for me within my friend group and my family was like, your like masculinity is measured by how many chicks you get. And so while I was like not this tough guy, I sort of performed that in the realm of like dating and hypersexuality, and I use that to kind of like avoid real intimacy and real long-term intimate relationships most of my life, even through advertising. I had a few like 1-2 year relationships, and the last one kind of just like destroyed me, so I then avoided for a really long time. In advertising, the way that I kind of tapped into this hypermasculinity was I was a workaholic, so I prioritized work over friends and romance. I worked sometimes till 3 a.m, 7 days a week. And our like how tough you were and how much you got ahead in the agency culture was how hard you worked and how much you denied that you needed a break, right? So that was a big one, was workaholism. Then just like a lot of heavy drinking and numbing, and a lot of like, dating and shallow sexual experiences. No emotion. There's no room for emotion in an ad agency, especially not from, like a business, ops guy. God, what are some other ones? Yeah, domination, aggression, kind of like one of my roles was, on the one hand, I was the people guy, so I managed all of our clients and I managed our people, and I got that job because I was very good at soft skills, but at the same time, I did have to like crack the whip a lot. And manage timelines and manage structure and get really angry at people when they were not, falling in line. And I just found that I was becoming more of this like version of masculinity that I really resented growing up, and didn't like being told what to do all the time and controlled, and I saw it kind of like more rooted in fear. And the reality is like, most of my time in advertising, I was terribly afraid. I was like worried that shit was going to fall apart, and that was the energy I brought to everything. And, it got me professional success, but it was not good for my relationships. Yeah, I think you bring up a really important point. I had reached this, apex of what it means to be a man. I was, I had a great career where I was very respected and I was making great money in New York City. I was seeing a lot of women. I had, a good like social life, meaning in terms of like things to do, parties to go to. And I was independent. I was making my own way, and a lot of people don't do that in New York. And so, yes, I should have been thrilled, like absolutely over the moon. And the reality was like, there were moments of that, but most of the time I felt lonely. I felt disconnected from myself, and other people, and like deep relationships, and I felt like in many ways I was falling behind in who I wanted to be as a person. I think as a kid, I always felt, and this was always reflected back to me, but I was a sensitive guy, and I think kindness was like came naturally to me as gentle. And I think, I think I wanted to do something that was helpful and important to others, and so this like process of becoming a therapist is very much like coming home to a version of myself that I'd kind of killed, right? My inner child, or whatever you want to call it. And there's a concept of like the shadow. We talk about one's shadow, and that's like a part of us that we've repressed, and like our ego hides from us. There's also a concept that calls about the gold in the shadow, and that's actually how I interpreted my sensitivity, right? Growing up, that sensitivity was deemed like unacceptable and weak, and it made me less of a man. And the more I got away from that, the more I like felt unauthentic, and the more I felt like I was not living my truth. And now I've that gold in my shadow is kind of like my superpower. It's what makes me good at my job. It's like what pays the bills. And I'm not 100% aligned with it all the time. Sometimes I can still be a dick. But I'm much more aligned with what feels like the real me. And I will say, like, this kind of touches on a concept of what I call integrated masculinity, and I'm not the only one that calls it this. And I just, to full disclosure, I'm not calling myself a fully integrated masculine person, but I'm getting closer to that certainly than I was. And the way I like to talk about integrated masculinity is it's kind of like, if you imagine the yin-yang symbol, right? It is, it resembles balance and integration, and it has kind of light and dark energy, but also it's supposed to represent masculine and feminine energy. And so, when I think about that energy that I was talking about of sensitivity would have been deemed feminine energy, and I banished it, right? And I leaned into this masculine energy of like hyper competition, aggression, etc. I found myself really alone, and this process of coming back into the center and kind of integrating, accepting that I have these parts that are domineering and aggressive, but also I have these other parts, has made me more balanced. I read a book called Designing Your Life that is just so profoundly helpful for life and career planning. And there's an exercise in that book that's called the Good Time Journal. And you essentially just keep a journal, and you measure your energy levels throughout the day. And when you are feeling energetic, you want to take note of it. What were you doing? When you feel drained, you want to take note of it. What were you doing? And when you have this done in both the personal and professional environment, you start to track, ooh, this stuff lights me up. This makes me happy. This person makes me happy. This really drains me. This makes me unhappy. I hate admin. I fucking hate selling, right? I love collaborating. I love Sally, or this woman. And when you do that, you start to have a pretty clear idea of what consistently makes you happy, and what consistently makes you unhappy. And so from there, you can start to build little maps of potential career ideas that give you more of what makes you happy. And, also you can start to reflect on your friends and partners through this lens of like, oh, it turns out people that don't respect my boundaries really drive me nuts, you know? So that is not something I want. And yeah, that really helped me change careers. And helped me identify actually like things that I really liked. Because if you grow up in a family or an environment like I did, where performance is everything and it doesn't really matter what you want or need, you learn to you actually unlearn what you like, right? So you make yourself kind of dumb to yourself, just to kind of survive and cope. And you know, that results in like people growing up and just like having no idea what they actually want. And you know, that sucks. That's a recipe for misery. It is called Designing Your Life, and it's by Dave Evans and I think Bill Burnett. One was an ex-video game marketing guy. The other is a Stanford business school professor. They both are now. Sorry, Stanford Design School. And the exercise is called the Good Time Journal. But the thing that made me most confident in taking the plunge was this book, because I had never paid attention to energy. I'd never like looked at the fucking raw, no BS data. And from there, you know, it gives you exercise to make 3-5-year plans based on like what gives you energy, what gives you like is engaging for you, and what gives you flow, essentially. But yeah. So what I find most frequently working with men is a number of things, but I think the most frequent is just struggling to understand and communicate their emotions, and also be tuned in to what's happening in their bodies. And so that's like the core challenge that I see with men in my office. And there's a reason for this, right? If you've been taught that emotions are not manly and weak, well, then you learn to not pay attention to them and numb them. And emotions live in our body. Our body is the communicator of emotions. We feel fear in our gut, we feel shame and sadness in our chest and our throat. We feel anger in our hands and feet and face, right? And so a big part of my work, both in men's groups and individually, is getting men out of their head and into their body, which frankly, it's an ongoing process. I'm still getting better at it, learning it. But yeah, that's the main shit. And then there's obvious things of like, what's my purpose? And so, what do I want to do? And that's usually related to performance and making money, which are kind of the more like traditional masculine requirements, right? And then another big one is like, I'm struggling in my relationships. I show up, I would say I see a lot more avoidant men, but like, so they kind of thrive in alone time and struggle to communicate their emotions and, feel like everyone's trying to encroach on their autonomy, right? Again, it lines up with those masculine values. So a nice guy is actually a term that's I believe it was first coined by Dr. Robert Glover. He wrote a book called No More Mr. Nice Guy, which is an off-putting title because obviously I'm nice, you're nice. I still want to be nice, but the goal is to be kind, not nice. So Nice guys are, someone that constantly subjugates their needs for others and gets kind of walked on. And so they come in and they're kind of like, I don't feel like a man. I feel stuck in every arena of my life. And so that's where, and I struggle with this personally myself for a long time. So the primary things we work on is boundaries, emotions, because they're kind of key to understanding that you're having your boundaries violated and communicating that you're having your boundaries violated. So we work on boundaries, and then we work on them tapping into their emotions, what's happening in their body, and then assertive communication. So actually standing up for themselves, right? Saying, I don't like this, or no, I would rather do this.
Yeah.
Or I need a raise, or I need you to stop treating me this way. And, those are all clumsy ways of setting boundaries, but you get the idea. The difference between a nice guy and a kind guy is that a nice guy is people-pleasing and subjugates his needs in order for other people to like him, which is duplicitous, and it's manipulative, and it's a lie. So it kind of leaves that nice guy feeling unfulfilled and stuck in their life, and it also leaves other people feeling like, who is this person really? A kind guy, or a kind person, because this nice guy can be a nice girl, right? It's the same idea, is assertive, right? They express their needs and wants, so it's very clear, you know where they stand. They have boundaries, which make them feel safe, but also makes everyone else feel safe. Okay. And there's no ulterior motive, right? They accept themselves, and so they're okay saying something, even if it's might be momentarily upsetting to the other person, because it's the truth.
Yeah.
Reality is that the majority of the public, the majority of men, interpret that term as a threat. It's a bludgeon, and it induces shame, and so their armor goes up. The fight, flight, freeze response goes up. They're no longer hearing you. So if you really care about, which I do, and I always did, but if you really care about influencing someone to change and maybe experiment with a different kind of masculinity, or just different behavior in general, you got to have them listening. And the term toxic masculinity does shut them down. So everyday life application of radical genuineness I would call assertive communication. And if you have passive communication on one side, right? We all know what that is. That's I lose, you win. You have aggressive communication on the other side. That's I win, you lose. You have passive aggressive, which is lose-lose. No one wins. And you have assertive, which is win-win. And it's been an absolute game changer in my life. And it requires you to actually know what you're feeling emotionally and what the impact of a situation is on you. I have an acronym for it, but it's FEB. So like the month February, facts, emotions, and boundary, right? So an example would be like, the other day when we were in public, you were making fun of me. I was the butt of your joke. Like when that happens, I feel embarrassed. I feel sad that my own partner would do that, and I feel honestly really angry. And can you not do that moving forward? Or why do you do that? That's such a rare, mature conversation,
Yeah.
but it is a form of radical genuineness, and it's win-win, right? I want a win scenario for me. I don't want to be made fun of in public. And I want a win for you, right? I don't want you to be doing that to anyone. It's a bad look. And a win for us. So we're actually talking about this and like having a more healthy relationship. And I'll tell you, it feels weird at first, but it is like I've had enemies turn into friends.
Yeah.
People that were super disrespecting me and like had all sorts of projections about who I was, and I was like, hey, that fucking hurts.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh my God, you're right. I'm being a total asshole, you know? Yeah. And then like from then on you have just such a foundation of respect because you spoke the truth.
Yeah.
I'll just say what I did, and I think that might help. First thing I did was I joined a men's therapy group that met in person every week in New York, and that changed my life. There's immense healing power in groups. As an agent of change, it's like normalizes shame. Unearths things that are maybe abnormal that you were not seeing and helps you actually have a team in that change process. It's just a lot of great stuff. Another thing is, like, I think 12-step programs in general are that you can get a lot of value out of them, whether that's like Al-Anon for friends and family of alcoholics or addicts, or, sex and love addicts, or all this stuff. And take what you like and leave the rest is a phrase I like to use. What else? I would say, you could see a therapist individually. You could see a coach individually. And no matter who you're seeing, I just recommend make a decision based on what you feel are strong ethics and integrity, and if you feel safe with them, and also if you feel like they're going to challenge you. And one last really important thing is whether they've gone to the places that you want to go. Bell Hooks, The Will to Change. For me, if you had to read one book on like men and masculinity, I think that's probably the most transformative, most seminal for me. She is a radical feminist, so there is that perspective, but I think it's like a master class, and it'll change the way you see the world. Iron John, which I rolled my eyes at a long time ago, but I read it, and it integrates a lot of like Greek mythology and Jung's, 4 masculine archetypes. And it has just a lot of valuable wisdom and direction, I think, for a man of any age. No More Mr. Nice Guy. I mentioned that book by Robert Glover. That is for like someone who's, struggles with people pleasing, boundaryless. They struggle with their emotions, feeling stuck professionally or in their relationships. Integrating Your Shadow. I think that's Robert Moore. That talks about like Jung's ego and shadow. So it's like integrating whatever elements of yourself that you have banished, and it's a spiritual process, but it's, I think, big for men and masculinity. I think I'll just distinguish between like a men's therapy group and a men's group run by peers, right? So in a men's therapy group, which is what I first joined, you have a trained professional with experience, and a lot of kind of like, school and learning around specific issues. And they're going to be more aware of like, what is a mental health condition that might require more attention than the men's group can address, and also where to direct you if you're really struggling. So like that's are the benefits of a men's therapy group. But if you're without the means to access that for whatever reason, money or you just don't want an authority-like figure in the group, there are a number of organizations that that do men's work. There's Sacred Sons. There's Everyman, which is an organization I was kind of a part of and I've worked with a lot. They're going through some transition. So all of those are good starting places for like retreats. Also John Wineland, he has, he does a bunch of retreats. I went on a retreat with Everyman, and then after that, me and another guy came back and started a men's group based on what we learned there. And it's still going 4.5 years later, and it's free. There's no set leadership. We rotate leadership every 2 weeks, and we just really support each other and teach each other. We support each other in exploring our internal worlds, our emotions. We challenge each other. We get people out of their heads into their bodies. That stuff. So, hypermasculinity is kind of a set of values, and if you think of hyper, it just means like the most extreme form. So, best way to think about this is like some of the most popular shows of the last 20 years, right? Breaking Bad, The Sopranos, The Wire, Narcos, Succession, Mad Men, right? These masculine characters are representing usually the hyper the most. So it's a set of values communicated through culture, TV, movies, videos, etc. And that set of values is hyper competition, hyper stoicism, no emotions, hyper autonomy, so like the lone wolf culture, grandiosity, aggression, hypersexuality, violence, and homosociality. So if you follow those hypermasculine traits to their most extreme form, it can lead to social isolation, antisocial tendencies, depression, numbness, violence towards others, jail, death, right? So through that lens, it's kind of no surprise that when we have these values coming down from, media, culture, etc., that we find that men are dying by suicide at 4 times the rate of women. Are, 1 in 5 men say they have no close friends. That's crazy. 97% of mass shooters are men. 93% of incarcerated individuals are men. And men are struggling in school and in the job market and in the workforce like never before. And so this isn't I'm not saying all this for poor men. I'm just saying that some of the kind of what we call the most masculine ways of being are not really working for us. Something stuck with me in elementary school, and that was the icon Betty Friedan, and she wrote The Feminine Mystique. And something that she that differentiated her from other feminists was that she saw that she had to include men in the conversation, and that was the most effective way of advancing the feminist movement. I think the same is true when we're talking about advancing a more healthy masculinity or integrated masculinity.
And we need to stop seeing men as the enemy, women as the enemy, them as separate, but kind of see the systems in place that prop this up. So if we could focus on like hyper-masculinity as maybe the source or the dynamic, the challenge that we're trying to resolve, I think that takes an us versus them out of the equation. And we recognize hyper-masculine values can show up whether you're a man, a woman, or non-binary. And that's, I think, the system that we need to rewrite. And how do we do that? I don't think that's a very creative problem to solve.
Yeah, so what do you think it means to be a good man?
I don't think there's a single definition.
Things that make up a good man are just things that make up a good person. Someone who's honest, someone who's decent.
You're also willing to express yourself in a healthy way, and you're in touch with your emotions as well.